Hello and welcome back to OT, the podcast. We're here to talk about watches, time, and how to spend it. I am Andy Candy Green. How are you?
Who am I or how am I?
Both.
I am Felix Schultz and I am well.
Tremendous, Felix. We've got a cool guest joining us.
The coolest.
He's a pretty cool guy. His name is Mark Cho, and he's the co-founder of the Armoury. He was involved with Drake's, the
Still is,
sort of the menswear label, not the Toronto rapper.
Maybe
unfortunately.
both. Maybe both. Have we seen Drake's wearing a bit of Armoury gear maybe?
Actually, now that I think about it, I think in Nice for What, Drake was wearing a pretty tidy fit. So
we should have asked. We should have asked Mark when we get him on, but that was a missed opportunity. Maybe there's been some lawsuits, like Lewis Hamilton and Hamilton. Maybe Drake's has sued Drake.
Oh. That's why there's the S on the end.
True.
Yeah, the details matter, Felix.
Yeah,
so
sure.
We'll get into that. Really cool chat. He's a big watch guy. He's a big.
Is he a big watch guy or is he a little watch guy?
Well, he's a very passionate watch enthusiast and collector. Mm-hmm. But you're right. A lot of people will know him or might have heard of him due to I think it was the Ideal Wristwatch size survey.
Yeah.
He did where he had like 1,000 people fill out a survey about sort of their perceptions of their wrist size and their own wrist size, and sort of do all this analysis of the data.
Can I just say
really cool
that 2020 Andy Green's responses would be very different from 2018 Andy Green.
I know. Sort of one of those how it started.
We need to follow up and turn it into a longitudinal study.
How it started, how it's going.
Yeah.
I should do that as
get some ethics approval. This is turning into academia. Do you know, speaking of academia, I've been looking at a bit of history recently.
History of?
Watches, basically. That's mostly what we talk about here. I mean, I have been looking at some early modern European history, but that's just entirely for pleasure. No, I've been writing a piece for a little publication called A Collected Man that we contribute to on occasion.
Heard of them?
Yep. I don't know if it'll be published by now, but it'll be close. So I feel I can sort of let the cat out of the bag a little bit. But I had a theory, and it turns out that the data backs me up, that 1993 was a big year for watches.
What happened in 1993?
What didn't happen in 1993? I'll give you a few nuggets. God. A few nuggets.
No spoilers, though.
Well, no, there will probably be spoilers. Panerai released their first publicly available civilian collection. IWC Schaffhausen made a watch called Il Destro Scafussa, which translates to the Warhorse of Schaffhausen, which was made by a bunch of people, including the work of Habring, Kurt Klaus, and Renaud and Pappy. It's a super, super awesome watch, very important in the modern era. What else happened? Oh, yeah. AP Royal Oak Offshore dropped. Bill Clinton became president.
Okay, all right, enough.
In Utero,
we'll wait for the article
Nirvana's
to come out.
In Utero album was launched.
God, get off on this day.
Were you born? Were you born in 90? How old were you? You were like...
I turned 2.
Nice.
In the summer
you learned how to walk?
Yeah, I was probably... I was probably still drooling. I want to talk to you about something.
Is it related to 1993?
What year did the film Daylight come out?
Oh, that was 1996, I believe. But I think I know where you're going with this. The watch featured in it was made in 1993.
We're talking about some watches that have come up for auction with Philips. They are none other than Sylvester John Rambo Stallone's pieces. So
not all of them, one assumes. Some of them.
Not all of them. But I think he's got 5 or 6 pieces coming out. So Lot 47, which you've just mentioned, is a Panerai Luminor.
Yep. A-series.
From the film. Yeah, A-series from the film Daylight, the one he wore in the film, which is pretty iconic. And then there's like 4 or 5 other Richard Milles.
Including that one with the bloody compass on it that was like made. It was he sort of was involved in the design, wasn't he?
I'm not sure, but he wore it in The Expendables 3.
Yeah, I think it was like made as like the modern Ultra Rambo watch. Like it was something like that was sort of the premise, but
Well, he wore that one in Expendables 3. There's the sort of the Johann Blake, the
Yeah, it's one of
Beast,
my
which is that
favorite. I
green
really
one.
like that one. It's one of my favorite modern RMs.
There's the Skull. There's the Skull, which is the RM 51-01, which is pretty cool. I think there was like it's one of 30. And then I think the watch you're talking about with like the compass is the RM 20-01. He
Oh.
might have had a bit of that was a collaboration. Actually, you're right. It's even got like the level in it, but that was a collab between.
I'm right. I'm always right. I got a question for you.
Yeah.
So
This is the one with the water purification tablets. That's right. Jeez, 2018. What a year.
That's, I mean, very useful in 2020, perhaps. I've got a question for you. When does a celebrity watch become important? Like for me, just because Sly owned that Richard Mill, I'm not particularly fussed about it. Like, but the Daylight Panerai one is slightly cooler. Like, and assume it's a celebrity you're not a big fan of. Like, you're not.
So okay,
yeah, you know what I'm saying?
This is interesting. Yeah, I know what you're saying. So it's multifaceted, right? Because there's like the Daylight Panerai is crossover between like film props, which is a huge sort of market, and sort of celebrity watch. So there's the overlap there. So I think that's going to be like by far the most expensive piece to sell to be realized.
You reckon it'll
For
come
sure.
in more at the
For
mills?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's got that because it's got the film prop, and like think about some of like the crazy film props out there. It's probably like a much bigger industry than like the secondhand watch market. But then in terms of like just watches that Sly has worn, I do like these are hot watches like Richard Mille. They're pretty hot right now. Obviously, they're not all sort of the
I don't think
the
like
tonneau cases.
Yeah, like say the Johann Blake. I don't think it's going to get a massive premium because it was Sly's over if it was some rando dudes.
No, I think it will. I think
you reckon.
Yeah, because it's him giving it to the auction house as well. Like it's not this was once owned by Sly, 3 years ago. Like he's consigning it, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah,
I think it will. I think Sly, he's been around for such a long time. He's done some great films. He's done some horrible films, but you want to own a piece of like that history. It's the same with Arnie. Like those two guys.
Yeah,
are
I think like you can generally say Sly and Arnie, particularly Sly, has had like a genuine impact on the watch industry. Like certainly with like Panerai wouldn't be anything if he wasn't around. I'm pretty comfortable saying that. Like they just have disappeared in the 90s. And Arnie's sort of, you can sort of say that he made the offshore happen. Like when he sort of did that End of Days collab in the late 90s, like that sort of, I think, made the offshore pop in the States.
But think about how many people as well that would like just be desperate to like
Rambo's
own a piece
watch.
Like that'd be pretty cool as well. Like Sylvester Stallone used to own this. Like that's a cool flex.
Yeah, look, if I've got Richard Mill money and I'm bloody in my my pool house with my my jukebox and my pool table and my memorabilia, and I'm like, yeah, this was John Rambo's Richard Mill. I guess that's cool. I don't know, but for me personally,
you know how they bid for the watches?
They fire a gun in the air or something.
Ariel.
Is that Ariel Adams from A Blog to Watch? They have to yell out his name.
Yeah.
It's also, by the way, it's Adrian.
That's Adrian, is it?
Yeah. Clearly, you're a massive Sly fan.
I was saying Oral.
Oral. Or is it Paul Boutros? Who knows? But for me, like, I think
we can cut that out.
I think the legitimate cultural significance comes down to watches that have that crossover impact. So the movie impact, the celebrity impact, and the impact on the field of the watch. So the Panerai is a really great example. The Paul Newman is a great example. And then you see other ones that are like, I don't think because it's a cool watch owned by a cool guy, it doesn't automatically add up to some sort of magic secret source of super expensive auction hype.
No, definitely not.
That's my take. Do you know what we need to do now, Andy Green?
Oh, we need a break.
Mate, we do.
Oof, let's do it. This week's episode is brought to you by Gucci, and today we're talking about all things Gucci grip.
Exactly. We've been spending a little bit of time with a few key grip models, and before we get down to the details, I thought we could use a bit of backstory. The grip was launched in 2019 and was designed by Gucci creative director Alessandro Michele and is very much in keeping with his 70s inspired direction for the brand. The watch is inspired by the early days of skating. The name grip comes from grip tape used to keep skaters on their boards.
Skaters gonna skate.
Exactly. The Gucci grip has grown quickly into a fully fledged family with colours, complications, and even collaborations with none other than Mickey Mouse.
Mr. Mouse himself. The other really interesting thing about the grip is that it was conceived as a gender neutral watch. It's sort of a cushion shaped watch design with a very non conventional dial display. The first one had a little date at 6 and two gauge like displays showing the hours and the minutes. And while there are quite a few options now, they all still have that grip look. It's a really cohesive collection.
Quick question, Andy. Do you think the grip is retro or futuristic?
An even quicker answer both.
No, that's a good answer. Andy, you've been rocking the yellow gold 38mm roulette. What is it, and what's it like on the wrist?
Cool. Well, like all grips, they're genderless watches, thanks to both the size and the design. On this wrist, mine, feels good, and the bracelet drapes nicely. At first glance, it looks, really retro because it's got the obvious, vibes from the 70s as intended by, Gucci's creative director. But at the same time, it blends that mechanical digital display powered by the quartz movement, and it feels futuristic. If I had to describe it, sort of like watching Back to the Future and seeing how they portrayed the future to be. So I've been wearing it in the 38mm yellow gold PVD case with the roulette wheel. It's a heap of fun to play with. Essentially, there's this roulette wheel with a lovely light blue mother of pearl disc that sort of complements the gold in a really good way. But it's powered by a little pusher. You spin it around and click it to spin it around, and it's just fun. It's even borderline addictive to play with.
I agree, and I love this thing. The wheel is cool, you spin it, and you can get future, chance, or more if you're lucky. And then there's tenebrae, which means
Ooh.
darkness. So maybe not that one so much. The Australian price of this one, the 38mm yellow gold PVD roulette, comes in at $3,190. You can buy all the grips at Gucci.com. Just plug in Gucci Grip into the search bar. They've got secure checkout and speedy shipping. Of course, if you want to do it in person, you can head to your closest Gucci boutique or authorized dealer and get your hands on the grip. Of course, we'll link everything up in the show notes. But Andy, we've got to get back to it.
We do. See you guys. And we're back. All right, Felix, what are we doing?
We're getting him on the line. Not Sylvester. Mark Cho.
Plug the number in, hit dial.
Beep, boop, beep, 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 boop. Beep, 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 beep. Today's guest is a co-founder of The Armoury and he's a co-owner of menswear emporium Drake's. He's also an art and science enthusiast. You might have heard of him on Hodinkie's podcast. You might have read about him on The Rake or over at Our Friends A Collected Man. We think he's one of the sharpest gentlemen on the planet. Welcome to the podcast, Mr. Mark Cho.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me.
Now, first things first, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you come from in the world?
Yeah, so I was born in London. I'm Malaysian Chinese. I was born in London. I grew up kind of here, there, and everywhere. A bit of time
Nice.
in London, a bit of time in the US. I went to school in the UK and in Hong Kong for a little bit, and then LA for a little bit, and then university in the US, then worked in the US, and then UK, and then eventually China as well. And I was doing all sorts of things. Like I started in fashion, and then I worked in banking for a little while. I worked in real estate for a little while, but my first passion was always tailored clothing. And about just over 10 years ago now, I managed to kind of drag myself back into like set my course back into clothing. And here I am 10 years later, co-founder of this kind of multi-brand men's store called the Armoury, and we have a couple outposts all around. So we have two in Hong Kong and two in New York. And then I also found myself the co-owner of an old English heritage brand called Drake's. which is a lovely company, and it actually originally was primarily a manufacturer of neckties as well as like a designer and brand for scarves and other accessories. But in my 10 years, we also took over other factories and started making our own shirts in house and started opening stores. So we have, let's see, Drake stores in London, New York, Seoul, and Tokyo. And watch collecting has been a pretty big part of my life. In fact, it seems to be an ever-growing part of my life, just because like in the last couple of years, I've had the good fortune to kind of get involved in some watch projects. So that has been fun. But yeah, I've been a watch collector for since 2000 and about 2005.
Amazing. Well, we'll get into some of those details in a moment, specifically the watches and definitely the Armoury and how you ended up, part owning Drake's, because I'm sure that's a fascinating story. But we've talked about where you're at now. Your background isn't fashion, though. You sort of had a more of a business real estate background. So what were you doing before fashion, and how did you end up with these brands that you've just mentioned?
I mean, I always really liked tailored clothing. Like, I just found it a really fascinating thing. It started when I was 16, and I was, my school had a uniform, but when you're 16, you can wear a suit. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I started looking into suits. And as I learned more and more about it, I just became more and more enamored with them. And, this was like before there were forums on the internet or websites talking about this sort of stuff. So it was just like a lot of asking people and going to shops and talking to people. And, growing up in the UK and being a size 36/46, which is, a relatively small size, there's not a lot of stuff available. So you really
Mm.
got to dig. In fact, funnily enough, like I think one of the reasons I got so into watches is because I like smaller watches and it's hard to find. So you really got to dig. And as a result of having to spend so much time digging for this stuff, you kind of develop a familiarity with it that maybe the average person never even needs to develop.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think that's something that echoes true for me. Certainly, you obsess over certain brands because maybe you can't find them locally, or you have to get something specially made. So you really
Hmm.
hone in on the details.
Yeah.
You've mentioned that you've had quite a sort of a frequent flyer upbringing, across continents and countries. How
Hmm.
has that sort of broad scope at an early age informed your own sense of style and fashion?
Mm.
It's an interesting question. I don't think it informed it necessarily that much. I always felt most at home in London. Like, I guess if you're to ask me where home is, although I don't get to spend as much time as I'd like there, I'd still say London is my home. And I've always kind of preferred like British-ish style, I suppose. In that like a lot of kind of more subtle, somber colors, but then every once in a while, like you just do something a little crazy. I think that's kind of a sentiment that a lot of British people would get on board with.
I, I want to challenge you on that a little bit, because you've having that international upbringing. You're also talking different climates, and the climate in, say, Hong Kong is very different to the UK and London. So
Mhm.
loving that British, approach to tailoring and style, have you then kind of brought that over to sort of the climate that is Hong Kong? Do you think that that's been part of the influences, and that sort of has impacted how you dress there?
No, in fact, funnily enough, when it comes to tailoring, I actually don't own that much British tailoring. Like
Okay.
it is part of my job basically to go around and like figure out and find out and discover as much about tailoring as I can. And this is why the Armory actually has quite an international bent. Like we call ourselves International Classic Artisanal Clothiers, which is kind of a mouthful. And one day I'll probably retire that tagline. But the point is that as long as it's classic style, so kind of in that framework of like suit jacket, and shirt and tie, lace up shoes, like that sort of look. There's many countries in the world that do it, and they all have their own take on it. And
Hmm.
part of kind of being, I guess, a frequent traveler and someone who's lived in a lot of places, it's quite it's quite fun, and um, it's quite enlightening to see how in each little region and locale people kind of make their own uniforms. Like, so for instance, like with our clothing, with our tail clothing in the shop, we have some that's made in Osaka, and that follows kind of a Southern Italian style. We represent a few bespoke tailors. So like we have a Milanese bespoke tailor, we have a Florentine bespoke tailor, we have Neapolitan bespoke tailors we work with, as well as Japanese bespoke tailors. We have one Japanese tailor who, for instance, specializes in classic American style. Like classic American style, like you'd see in the 50s and 60s. That Ivy style with the narrow lapel and with a lot of machine stitching. I think it's cool. I think it's cool to see how different people do different things, and I think that actually there is something quite authentic about it. The idea that uh, this thing can only be born in this place due to these conditions. Like Florentine style is another kind of one of my personal favorites. And the Florentine style of tailoring is quite distinct from, say, the Milanese to the north or the Neapolitans to the south. Like people forget Italy was a bunch of warring states. And so, of course, like you wouldn't want to look like your neighbors. And I like how tailoring can like pick up that history and be part of that history and part of the culture of that local place.
That is a really yeah, that's a long perspective that I think you sort of you lose sometimes. You
Hmm.
mentioned before that it's sort of part of your job is to look into this stuff. That asks, or it lends itself to me to ask, what is your job? What does it look like on a day to day basis? And I might break this down into 2020 and a normal year, air quotes sort of answer, if that's
Yeah,
okay.
sure. No, of course. So I take care of a lot of stuff at the Armory day to day, like it's my baby. Um, and so that could be anything. It could be, there's like a short list of customers that I personally will take care of just because like they're important customers or and they have kind of like more complicated needs. But like a lot of times I will hand off a lot of stuff to the team. We do a lot of like in-house development for new products, so I take care of a lot of that as well. But it's a small team for that sort of stuff. It's like me, Jim Parker, Alan C, my co-founder, and Jan Tong. And the Army is a little different from most kind of fashion brands in this way. Like there is no one single creative director. Like we all come together as a team, and the result is quite diverse. I wouldn't always say it's coherent. It's diverse, but it means that everyone kind of gets a look in, and everyone can take it and turn it into what's right for them. Because that for me is a fundamental thing about clothing and about dressing, right? Like, is that ultimately like you should be dressing for yourself, not necessarily to the guidelines of a brand or a director or anything like that. In fact, it reminds me of like one of my favorite stories about the Armory, which was when I was in New York and we're doing like a team portrait, and I just told the guys, we're doing a team portrait tomorrow, so just dress up. And the next day, everyone came in and they were dressed beautifully. Nobody wore a sport coat. Everyone wore full suits. And you know what? Every single guy looked like an Armory guy, but every single guy looked different. Like they all had their own personality in those outfits, and they didn't look like photocopies of one another. They were very distinct, and it was beautiful. That's the end goal for like any customer for me. It's like you should always look like
Yeah,
your own person.
that's really cool. And what I find interesting about the Armory is that you stock all of these great brands that you've curated throughout your travels, but you also have your own label. And I'm curious to hear what the goal is with that, what you try to achieve with the Armory label itself, and where you kind of price it as a result.
The Armory label is something that came about probably in the last couple of years. I guess because we felt like, okay, we've been around this stuff for long enough. There may be some key things that don't exist in the market that maybe we could put together, or we just
Hmm.
wanted to put our own kind of stamp on on a certain category of product, something like that. So for instance, like recently we developed a new sport coat cloth called the Decade Twill, and it's a heavyweight 4-ply but not high twist worsted cloth in a twill pattern. I mean, sorry, in a twill structure.
Uh-huh.
Um, and it's done using Super 160 yarn. And this cloth basically doesn't exist on the market. Like it's not very commercial to make a cloth like this. The reason is that like Super 160 yarn is as a raw material, like it's quite expensive. And then to 4-ply twist it and then weave it into an actual sport coating cloth, it's just almost the price of cashmere. And most people would rather have like cheap cashmere than they would like really, really good Super 160 like this. But for us, like, and our customers, like they get it. Like when you have this cloth in your hand, you're like, oh wow, this is great, and it's they understand why it costs what it costs. Like you see this actually surprisingly a lot in the cloth world now. Like you can't get, for instance, 1,000-gram cashmere overcoating anymore. That used to be a thing, but now like cashmere is a little bit too valuable, and so it's not worth it to like make such heavy cashmere cloth. It's just not commercially as viable anymore.
Explain to me what we're talking about here. When we say 160s, that's the weight of the wool?
So Super 160 refers to the fineness of the raw wool, like the actual fiber of it.
Right, and then the twisting it into the twill. So that's
So
the technique that it's woven.
So Super 160, I think it's a 15.5 or a 16.5 micron hair, and that gets twisted, and then it's twisted into a single yarn, and then that single yarn is twisted again. Well, 4 of those single yarns are twisted again into a 4-ply yarn. And the thing is with twisting, like you can actually like highly twist it, but as you highly twist it, it does get springier, but you can lose a bit of the soft touch of it. So that's why we, in this case, didn't stress like a high twist.
Right, and so that makes me think of like a canvas, something made from canvas when we're talking about the texture. So what's the advantage of sort of using this superfine wool in this twill kind of construction? Is it strength? Is it durability? Is it sort of a nicer finish?
It's the soft touch. Like Super 160 that hasn't been highly twisted, like has quite a soft touch. But if you don't twist it into, say, like a 4-ply or something that it won't have much body. It'll be a little too thin. So you physically need a lot of that raw material in order to give it that body.
Okay.
Also, is it the sort of thing that is this your production of this fabric? Did it come from yourselves, or did it come from customer demand for something that didn't exist on the market?
We believed there was a gap for it. And going back to like the buying team, or like I guess the creative team, like all of us work with customers. Like we don't sit in a design office all day long thinking up stuff. We spend most of our time dealing with customers. And so what we make is very much informed by like what we think those guys that we really enjoy taking care of might want, as well as just our own the things that we might want for ourselves as well. Like there's not a day in the week that I don't have at least a few of Armoury pieces on my body.
And so something like this, which is a highly, what's the word I'm looking for, distinctive sort of fabric structure, which leads to a way that it feels and cuts and wears. Is it something that will be appreciated by anyone off the street, or do you have to have quite a sophisticated knowledge of tailoring to go, yeah, this is something special, this is why it's costs more or is harder to produce or whatever it is?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think the soft touch is something that most people will pick up on, right? Like when people touch something soft, it's a very kind of easy reaction to elicit. But I think that for someone who's more experienced in tailoring, like the more you wear it and the more you handle it as a cloth, like to feel that softness, but in a thicker cloth, is very unusual. And so I think that there's like that basic level of, oh wow, it's soft sort of appreciation, and then there's a greater like tailoring enthusiast appreciation for a product like this.
No, that's a really good answer. And on the Armoury style, which I want to kind of pull out a little bit more, because you've got all these other brands, but when you look at the actual Armoury line, sort of the things that jump out to me are high quality, but sort of a timeless approach to style, similar to I think watches, where if you buy smart and invest in quality, then they kind of last you a lifetime, as long as you don't change your body shape too much.
Yeah,
What I,
absolutely.
what I want to know, because aside from just sort of buying one of everything that looks amazing on the website, how do you buy smart in fashion or style?
Ooh, that is a tough one. Um, there's no there's no one answer really, I think. Mm,
Is it buying things that are investing in that the quality so that you're not replacing things over and over again? Is it sort of going to the right place the first time versus going to the wrong place three
I
times?
I think, and this is also my philosophy on watches too, but like I think it is important to kind of get to know yourself. I know it sounds a bit strange, but I have a metaphor for this, right? Which is like
Uh-huh.
clothing is a language,
Mm.
and so like your clothing speaks on your behalf. It's how it's part of how you interact with the outside world. And in an ideal world, your clothing should speak on your behalf as accurately and as truly as possible. So it requires you to have like a certain amount of self-awareness and a certain amount of like knowing what sort of person you are and how those things that you decorate your body with might be able to communicate that on your behalf, and how that translates to like buying stuff is I guess instinctively, as you get to know yourself, you will just know that some things are right and some things are wrong for you, um, and also you will figure out that you change and things that you
Hmm.
first started with may no longer be as relevant in your life as you thought they were. I think it's always a good idea to buy quality, simply because this thing might be with you for a long, long time. So obviously you'd like to use it for a long, long time. And also, if you decide it's not for you, but it's still a high quality item, you don't have to sling it. You can always sell it or pass it
Hmm.
on to a family member or a friend.
Mm.
Like the garment will still have many, many more years ahead of it, whether it's in your hands or not.
Yeah, that's true. And I think there's also other nice benefits to that in that you're buying less and you're sort of wasting less. And,
Oh,
there's,
absolutely.
the
Absolutely.
fashion industry is terribly wasteful in the bigger scheme of things, I understand.
Sadly, yes. Um, it's well, I won't get into that.
No, that's
I
fine.
don't know how to get into that without upsetting anyone.
Yeah, sure. No, I completely. And I think there's certainly brands out there that do wonderful stuff with dead stock, but I think your approach of like buying something really nice that will last for as long as possible is a great way to do it. You look at that return on investment per wear,
Hmm.
and you're doing okay after a few years or maybe even decades if you're lucky.
Yeah, I mean, with tailored clothing, especially like the way tailored clothing is put together, it's designed to be dismantled and reassembled as well. So, I have had things that I've had for close to 10 years, and I'm certainly not the same body size as I was 10 years ago. But I let it out, and it still fits. Feels great. Feels better than a new thing, in fact, because
Yeah, sure.
you grew up with it. I have a side business outside of the Armoury, or it's like an offshoot of the Armoury called Drop 93. And the whole point of Drop 93 is basically we had a lot of customers who had garments that they didn't know what to do with, right? And they were bespoke
Uh-huh.
garments and they were very well made. And it kind of killed me, the idea that customers would just sling them or not take care of them. So I said, well, just give it back to us. We'll figure out a way to take care of it. And so we clean it, catalog it, redo all the measurements so that whoever, and then try to sell it on. We have a website that lists it all. And I think we have probably the most comprehensive set of measurements you could get for if you wanted to buy a piece of tailored clothing online these days, because we really want to respect the work of the original craftsman who made it. And I think that that means finding a new owner when that garment no longer serves the needs of the original owner.
Fascinating. Now, this question, it might be sort of veering strongly into fashion or sort of seasonality talk, but do you think the events of 2020 and how it sort of dramatically changed, both business, industry, and people's personal lives, will that be changing what we're wearing next year and in years to come?
Yeah, I think a lot about that actually. You know, like our bread and butter is, of course, things that people are wearing to work, quote unquote, right? Like we have a lot of people who are like professionals who need to wear a suit to work. Now, for us, obviously, a suit is no longer restricted to the realms of work, but you know, a lot of people just need a bread and butter, high quality suit, so they come to us. And 2020 has really made me evaluate like what will the work uniform in the foreseeable future be? Because between like a lot of working from home, uh, people are maybe feeling like they don't need the suit in the same way
Mm,
anymore, right? But they still need
Mm.
to look professional, they still need to look presentable. Um, and so it's like, what is the new visual language for if you want to look professional? And that's why we've tried to come up with like some items that are not tailored items, but
yeah.
not hoodies and sweatpants either. Something.
I want to ask you a question on that because it's something I've been feeling, and it's probably happened to me over the last few years, moving out of sort of a more professional job where I was wearing a suit every day to that more
Mm,
kind of smart casual look. And a suit for me for the last couple of years has been more of a special occasion or an event. But
mm,
that's not to say I haven't owned tailored clothing, jackets, shirts, overcoats, that sort of thing.
mm,
But what I've felt lately, and maybe it's a theory that I have, especially with this whole kind of online shopping and the way that ready to wear clothing, I think in the last year or two has really, really improved to the point where I feel like there's a shift away a little bit from bespoke, which has probably been sped up by the whole not needing as many suits at the moment, but
mhm.
just the improved quality. And if you're sort of talking about it now, is that happening? Are you noticing sort of a more of a shift, to ready to wear purely out of maybe convenience and impulse?
Not for us, but we don't have like a typical customer. I mean, we are really
Mm,
like a very niche sort of audience. Um, our bespoke clientele continues to grow. But
interesting.
I mean, we're so small in the grand scheme of things. Like I don't think that we are representative of like a broader trend.
Andy, could we just take a break? I need a refill.
What are you drinking, Felix?
It's your classic filter roast from our new coffee sponsor, Inglewood Coffee Roasters.
Beverage sponsor, Felix. We have made it.
Hey, I've got a cheeky Yirgacheffe filter on the go at the moment. Ethiopian bean with some light floral notes. It's my daily, and I can't get enough.
Well, Felix, I'm actually punching out another double espresso using their Colombian Spirit of Peace espresso roast blend. It's sweet and biscuity.
So here's the deal. Use OT30, that's OT30, for 30% off your order at checkout. On top of that, Inglewood Coffee Roasters offer free shipping on all Victorian orders and Australia-wide when you spend more than $50.
Head to inglewoodcoffeeroasters.com.au to place an order today. We'll link that up. OT the podcast, fueled by Inglewood Coffee Roasters.
Let's get back to it.
I'm sitting at home, and I just want to get. I want to get it. I don't want to wait. I don't want to put measurements in. I want to get it. And
Absolutely.
with the different cuts and the quality and the time being invested into making these products better, just ready for you. It just that's my suspicion.
Yeah, well, like on Drake's side, and by the way, I didn't get a chance to say what I do at Drake. So I do virtually nothing anymore day to day at Drake's. I deal with like basically things that require a big check or like long-term things, or like real estate related things, like when we're looking at new shop sites and that sort of stuff. So I make it a point to never ever touch the product development side at Drake's, simply because like that has a very coherent aesthetic vision under Michael Hill, who's the creative director and also the co-owner of the brand with me.
Uh-huh.
Um, and for Drake's, like we have seriously moved into ready to wear in a big way over the last couple of years. And we, I mean, COVID is terrible. Don't get me wrong. We are lucky to have found ourselves in a position where like our stuff is easy for people to buy online and easy for people to wear at home right now. And our website is actually a bright spot in this business right now.
Yeah, I was going to sort of ask about that. Like, has this sort of forced you to move your more sort of bespoke offering into a digital space, or sort of a remote fitting, any of that sort of technology, or embrace that, or are you still very traditional, chalk and tape measures?
It
More
is
for the Armoury,
difficult.
I suppose, for this.
Oh yeah, for the
Yeah.
Armory, like when we do bespoke, like we take that term very seriously. So we don't advertise ourselves as doing bespoke. We work on behalf of tailors, and then they are the ones providing the bespoke experience. What that means is that,
Okay.
like, if you're making an order, then you are interacting with the cutter or with someone who's intimately involved in the production of the garment. And right now, because our tailors cannot travel to our shop to meet with our customers, we've basically put most of our bespoke stuff on hold. The ones that we have not are the ones where it's just the garment's almost complete, it's a final delivery, in which case we do a Zoom call with the tailor and we complete it over a call. And then we actually did explore for quite a while, like how feasible would it be to do bespoke fittings over a Zoom call.
Mm.
But it's it's pretty tough. I mean, Armoury team has been doing made to measure for 10 years now. Like everyone is well versed enough in like generally how to measure, how to fit. But we represent so many different tailors, and each tailor has their own way of doing things. And frankly, we'd all be more comfortable if just the tailor himself was doing it. Um, so we don't offer intermediate fittings. We just offer the final fit. In terms of like the Zoom setup, because for me, like it was really important for me to try and make the bespoke experience as like seamless as possible. Like when you're doing bespoke, um, it's the experience is really important and the relationships are really important. So it's like you want to feel like you're in the same room as the tailor. You don't want to feel like you're shouting through a video conference. You want to feel like you're just speaking at a normal voice and everyone is
Sure.
seeing everything clearly. And so, in technical terms, what that meant was like we got wireless lav mics now for everybody. So the customer will be on a
Mm.
wireless lav so that he can speak to the tailor as clearly as possible. We shoot everything not on a webcam, but on a digital SLR.
Mm.
And we actually use a second camera as well. So we get a second camera that acts as a second pair of eyes that we can move around the customer. So if a tailor wants to have a closer look at some aspect, say like how's the shoulder looking or how's the back under the arm looking, like we can just we can move the camera and zoom it into that section so the tailor can have a better look at it. And then we also record the calls, so there's like notes for the tailor to refer back to if he ever needs it.
That's handy.
Yeah.
That's
Fascinating.
handy.
Yeah, it's pretty
That's
interesting.
really cool.
So
That's
like
really
it's
cool. A good
worked,
way to pivot.
yeah, right. And so it's worked well for made to measure. Made to measure is something that we do a lot of, and with our made to measure partners, this has been really like a good way to work. It's not that much different from if they were here.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. Well, love hearing that. We've danced around it for too long now. Tell us what the deal is with Drake's. How did that happen? How did you end up part owning it? What is the story?
That was like 10 plus years ago. 10 plus years ago, I was like helping out a friend's tailor shop, WW Chan, and I was buying accessories for
Oh
them. I
yeah.
always loved that brand, and I was there was one year when we were just getting the Armoury started, and me and Alan had gone to Drake's and were doing the purchasing not just for WW Chan, but for our new store that WW Chan was actually going to be a part of anyways. And Alan was talking to Michael Hill, who was Michael Drake, the original founder's right hand man. And Alan was talking to Michael Hill, and Michael Hill was like, "Yeah, Michael Drake's had the company since 1977, and he's thinking about retiring. And so we're kind of not sure what's going to be the fate of the company." And then Alan told me, and I thought, "Oh, that's really interesting, because Drake's had its own factory. Like I love manufacturing, and I love the fact that it was manufacturing in London as well. And it was like a small but profitable business. At the time, it was really doing a lot of private label. The brand was, it was seen more as an accessories brand than anything more than anything else. But
Uh-huh.
I
Mm.
spoke to Michael and I said, "Listen, would you be interested in selling to me?" And luckily, he said yes. And then Michael Hill joined me as well, and he became an equity holder in the business. And ever since, it's kind of been Michael's baby to steer, and he's done an incredible job with it. So
Yeah,
really,
sure.
it just came down to like an accidental conversation, and then me being in the right place at the right time, and kind of showing up and being serious about taking this really not that old. I mean, everyone thinks Drake's is like a million years old. It's only 1977, right? It's like
Oh,
47 years
really?
old. Yeah.
So I have a question around Drake's because if it's 15 years ago, you obviously owned it when they did the collaboration with Hodinkee, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And was that sort of your doing, or how'd that come about?
No, actually, that was I can't. I think it was Stephen Polrin's doing. I think it was
That makes
Stephen.
sense. Yep.
Yeah, and I can't remember what came first. So I can't remember if it was the knit tie or the pocket squares.
It was the
first.
tie. It was the grey,
Gray with dots, right?
The grey one, and then the black with
The Tudor one as well,
ivory
right?
one. No, that was later. So it was I've got one of the original ones actually.
Oh, nice.
Well, yeah, I
I
used
didn't
to.
even get one.
No, I see. I used to. I used to write for them for Hodinkee way back in the day, and that was like a Christmas present, which was very, very lovely.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's I wear it a lot. Still wear it all the time. Yeah, it was those, and then they did the pocket squares.
Yeah, that's right. The pocket squares are crazy. They sold out so fast.
I'll send you a picture later. Actually, I found when I was moving house the little sort of product information card that came with the tie from Hodinkee, and it's basically like it looks like it's been printed on nice cardstock and then cut out by hand and like sort of it's
Probably
very
was.
yeah, it's very lo-fi considering their sort of e-commerce and customer service platform now. It's fascinating.
Well, I mean, back in the day, it was like Steven and Ben and Will all in a WeWork. And Steven was like, man, I have to like stuff envelopes again. I'm like, yeah, well, good luck, Ben. At least you're selling ties. That's good.
And a Felix Schultz remotely from Victoria.
From Australia.
There you
That
go.
was, look, this seems like as good a time as any to start talking about watches, I think.
Please.
How did you get into them?
I got into it. It is funny you're asking me this because I've been asked to write something for Hodinkee's magazine in Japan. That's about how I got into watches. So I'm just going to regurgitate that in English rather than Japanese.
We've got the exclusive.
The English exclusive, anyway. Yeah.
There's this secondhand watch shop, and this is before these things were called vintage watches. It was just a secondhand watch shop on the way to work called Austin K that I would pass by every day, and I would always look in the window. And I got my first paycheck, and I went in and I bought an Omega Chronostop. It was 350 pounds. The pusher was a little wonky, but it was cool. I really liked it, and it kind of just like put me down this path, this never-ending black hole that I've quite enjoyed. So I guess it's not a bad black hole either.
Cool. And so it started with a Chronostop. What happened next?
Tried the Chronostop, and then there was an IWC that I later sold. It was a really good one though. Is it the 8541 movement?
I don't know what that is.
It was like one of their 60s era automatic movements, and it was a big deal at the time. Like it was one of the best movements they'd made.
Yeah.
Apparently.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know enough about movements to really be able to say why one is significantly better than the other, but
you knew it was good.
It was great. I was told it was good, and I was happy enough to go with that as a reason. But I enjoyed it very much. It was a great watch. And actually, other than those first two acquisitions, I honestly can't remember like what was the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and so on. Like after a while, they just started to blend into each other. And
Okay. Well, how about this as a question then? How do you go from being a watch enthusiast whose collection is blended into itself to selling watches?
Well, I've always kind of had merchant blood in me. Like I like selling stuff.
Okay.
It's fun, and I mean, the money is always interesting. But for me, I like helping people buy stuff. There's something very enjoyable about like giving a good opinion that will hopefully allow them to get something that might be useful in their life. Like the other day, for instance, I had a customer who's getting married. Congratulations, David, if you're listening. And his fiance very kindly offered to buy him a wedding watch. So they told me the budget, and they said, "Do you have any ideas?" And I said, "Oh, listen, why don't we just get on a call?" So I got on a call with them for like an hour and just like ran them through as many options as possible, and also tried to just like slowly divine them into something that would really fit David personally, right? Like, because that's what these things need to be. These things need
Mhm.
to be not about like I gotta have like this thing. It's got to be I have to have this thing that I think is really right for me. And for the occasion and for this moment in David's life, it seemed like some sort of nice, vintagey, dressy Patek would be like the right thing to have, right?
Yeah,
And
nice.
fortunately, like at this moment, this is actually a pretty good time to buy that sort of thing. Like smaller gold dress watches of any brand are really like kind of undervalued. So I was
Mm.
happy to point them in the direction of a couple of models, and we'll see if they manage to find the piece that they're looking for. They don't need to buy it for another couple of months. So I said I'll put out some feelers and speak some dealers and keep them posted if anything comes up.
Well, feel free to drop the exact model, and we'll see if we can help.
Oh yeah, sure. Right now or later?
Yeah,
No,
throw it in there.
no, not
Let's
right
help
now.
find David a
It'll blow
watch.
up. We've got such a
Yeah,
massively
that's
Yeah,
powerful
you
listener
are
base.
no,
We'll
you are
just
absolutely right. You are absolutely right. It will blow up and then like the prices will go
yeah.
crazy. So
You
I'm
I'm so
betting
sorry,
on
David. We
never
need
tell
another 20
never tell
grand.
people
Yeah.
what you want to buy. That's
yeah.
It's funny you say that, Mark. I actually have one in the safe that I'd love to sell to.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. What a coincidence. Okay, I know just the person who might want that.
Oh, we call that front running. All right, Felix, you had a question. Sorry.
no. Look, I think this is a good time as any to ask about your kind of famous in a sort of niche internet way, your wrist size study. Tell us a little bit
Oh,
about this.
so I was hearing in my various conversations with customers at the shop with alarming frequency people saying, "Oh, I have a really small wrist." And this was happening maybe like in 80% of the conversations I was having with people, which is way too high. There's no way 80% of the people I know have small wrists, right? So I
Uh-huh.
thought, you know what? It's time to actually collect some data and see if there's something else going on. And then, personally, like I've always liked smaller watches. I think I have small wrists, and actually, having done the survey, I now know I have below average size wrists. But I also figured out that like the size of people's, like the average size of wrists is smaller than people think and smaller than people perceive. Because it's a funny thing, right? Like no one is ever like, oh yeah, I'm of below average height. Most people say, oh, I'm probably of average height, right?
Yeah.
Yet somehow for wrists, people overwhelmingly say, oh, I have small wrists. So my conclusion is that basically there are so many watches that are just too big for people out there that
Mm-hmm.
people, in order to make sense of the situation, will just say, oh, I must just be smaller than the target market. So I must be the outlier, not the watches are the outlier.
Yeah, well, look, it was quite a detailed study. So you was there like a dozen questions, and you asked everything from sort of what your perceived wrist size was in terms of like was it small, average, or above average, and then you asked questions around the sort of watch size that people enjoyed wearing. Was there anything that surprised you with the data? Because you got nearly 1,000 responses at the time of sort of analyzing it all, but what jumped out to you in terms of surprising data?
Oh, actually, in the end, I think I'm now at like 2,000.
Oh
In fact,
damn.
I'd like to
Mm-hmm.
relaunch that survey at some point because there's some improvements that could be made to it.
We can
But what
can we
jumped out
can
in the
we link it
data?
up? Is it still live?
Yeah, it's still
Yeah.
live. Go for
Oh
it,
great.
please.
Yeah, we'll definitely link it in the comments.
Yeah, it'd be fascinating to see what people think. Um, what jumped out in the data? Well, so people who perceive themselves as having small and average wrist size actually hugely overlapped in terms of their actual measured wrist size, to the point where like they were barely even different populations at all. And then the number of people who were in the large wrist size category were minuscule. Like it was amazing how few people actually said I have large wrists. So that was one thing. Uh, there was a huge slug of people who preferred 36 millimeter watches. Um, and that my sample is going to be a little biased, right?
Mm.
Like at the end of the day, the way I distributed this thing was like to Armoury people, to Drake's people, to people who like read watch magazines. Like Waco helped give me a plug, ACM gave me a plug. I think even Steven at Hodinky gave me a plug too. And so you're going to get like watch enthusiasts,
Sure.
right? And watch enthusiasts, I think generally on average will probably have a preference for smaller sizes. But even then, I was surprised how many people selected 36 millimeters as like their preferred size. And I actually gave like a subset of the data to Grand Seiko and did a little presentation for them. It was funny to see like even among Grand Seiko, like people who pick Grand Seiko as their favorite brand, even then there were a lot of people saying like, oh, I prefer 36 millimeter size. And it's like Grand Seiko doesn't
Interesting.
even make a 36 millimeter size anymore, you know?
Yeah. I think
So I just
that's
think like there's a huge gap in the market for 36 millimeter watches.
that's what I was sort of going to ask, because I did it from your Instagram. I'm definitely one of the minority with the large wrist, legitimately large wrist. I do, however, still think 36 is fine, but there's a difference, I think, between what people want and what people are told, and I'm sort of talking generally that mainstream watch coverage and what the manufacturers and the brands are doing. It all, 38 is generally sort of the smallest for a men's watch in 2020, with a few outliers, I would say. And part of that's the technology, part of that's the movements, part of that's, but a lot of it, I think, is just sort of socially constructed. Why do you think that is?
As in, how did we get to 38 millimeters as
Yeah,
becoming
like,
this new standard?
well, I mean, that's sort of the collector enthusiast. That's because so often, on Instagram or on forums or whatever, you'll say, "Oh, I'll never wear a watch smaller than 42 millimeters." It's such a dogmatic sort of thing that it's, and there's no basis in reality. Like we were just talking the other day, Andy's just picked up a 36 millimeter watch, and I don't think he's regularly worn one before for a while. And you're loving it, Andy.
Never owned one.
You can't get enough of it. You're going to sell everything that's bigger. Why? So how is it that Andy has come only now, who's been collecting watches actively for years, that he's only just come to a point where he's gone, oh, I can wear this smaller size watch? Do you have any
firstly,
thoughts on
congratulations, Andy. I'm very happy for
Thank you.
for joining the 36 millimeter for life family.
Yep.
I assume, and this is the thing, I have not been around the watch industry, like the business cycles of the watch industry, long enough to say with any certainty. I assume at some point brands were like, we got to make something new, right? And something new means that it's just got to be a different size. So let's take this thing that used to be smaller and make it bigger. And then once you've made it bigger, you're going to have to make a movement that's going to fit it. But then once you've made that movement, you got to commit to it for a long time too, to amortize the cost of it as well, of getting into it. So I think that's kind of how we ended up with these larger size watches, and how that position has become like a little bit intractable. But also maybe just people got bigger over the last 50, 60 years. I
That's
find
true.
it a little hard to believe, but maybe big
Yeah.
enough to be like, okay, we're gonna go from 36 to 42 millimeters, right? Like, what is that? That's like a 30% jump, a 20% jump. Like people didn't get
At
30%
least.
bigger, right?
No.
I think
at least.
I think it's an insecurity thing.
Yeah, it is. No, it is. I mean, I say this all the time, but I have since buying this watch, 3-4 weeks ago now, the amount of people that have come forward and just asked like if they can pull off a 36 millimeter watch, and it's like ridiculous. I even have like women doing it. I'm like, just look like Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, like the biggest guys out in Hollywood all wore 36 millimeter watches. Like, it's not only is it okay, it's going to look great. Like, it's not, this need to like go big is purely out of some sort of like brainwashing through the marketing over the last decade or two, um, and just insecurity. But speaking of small watches, or smaller watches, I don't think they are. I'd say average. You obviously sell a few bits and pieces through the Armoury. like Nomos, but also anOrdain. How did the kind of relationship with anOrdain come about? Because that's obviously evolved into some really special projects.
Um, like most things we sell, I just started as a customer. I saw like one of my favorite websites for watch coverage, other than yours, of course, is Watches by SJX.
Yep.
And
Yes.
Jassian put out this piece about these Scottish guys doing enamel dial watches, and I was like, oh, that looks pretty cool, and the price is really reasonable. So I just bought one. I bought it, and I loved it. I thought it was so good. And then eventually I kind of got in touch with them, and they're like, yeah, we know who you are. Actually, we looked at your wrist check survey to develop our later models. I was like, oh my God, that's awesome.
Whoa.
And so I got to know him better and better. And I was like, listen, dude, you ever be interested in selling them at the shop? He's like, yeah, I'd love to. And then they even made us special dials, which was great.
So you're one of the few retailers. So I think there's Porter and Sons in Glasgow, and you've got your special your logo on the dial. Is that
Mhm.
the do you working on any limited editions or anything there that you can speak about, or we'll have
We
to wait
do
and
have
see.
we like this year's the Armoury's 10-year anniversary, so we do have like a
Ah.
special 10-year piece coming out. I'm super excited.
Any
I
hints?
left. I'll just say it's something to do with silver.
Ooh.
Silver.
Yeah.
Silver
Silver
cases, maybe.
dial. No, dial.
Interesting.
I
Interesting.
can't say anything more.
Okay. All right. Okay.
And who knows? Maybe this
How
project will never make it to market. Who knows?
it will. How has the reception been to your customers to a brand like anOrdain? Obviously, these are sophisticated and well sort of educated people in the space of fashion, and I imagine watches. How have they responded to a relatively new brand, a little bit quirky, very different, and a brand maybe they haven't heard of? What's the uptake been like for you?
Oh, they like it. The anOrdain watches, like the dials have this really nice handmade feel, right? It doesn't pretend to be a super fine dial like Swiss enamel.
Hmm.
You can tell it's a little rustic, but not in a bad way. I love it. And our customers love that aspect of it too. I mean, I have one customer who, he has a Patek 1526, he has a 570, and he has an anOrdain with a red dial. He's like, I just love the color. I think it's such a nice design. So,
Ab-
kudos to them for really
yeah.
finding, like, for making a product that, um, doesn't necessarily have to be tied down by its price point in any way.
Absolutely. I've got a Model 2 and I love it very much. So I'm clearly a fan, and I'll happily, shout their praises from any rooftops I can find.
Absolutely. Did you try their bracelets, by the way? The bracelets are awesome.
No, I haven't. I've got a camel leather.
Okay.
But yeah, maybe I'll have to get a bracelet.
Do you, Felix, or do I have it?
Yeah, you've stolen the watch for a while, but that's
Damn
okay. From maybe one extreme of watchmaking to another, in some ways, you're if anyone follows you on Instagram, they'll know you're a bit of a fan of Mr. Journe's work. Can you tell us what you like about Francois Paul and his watches?
Ah, I mean, what is there not to like? They are pretty great. I will definitely sing Mr. Journe's praises. I got into it because I was not that like I got into them, what was that, like 5, maybe 7 years ago? You remember when there was that George Daniels Sotheby's auction in London?
Of his estate?
hmm
Yeah.
Yep.
And among those pieces was an FP Journe. It was a chronometre souverain that FP had made for George and had even engraved it. And I was like, holy moly, that's like one of the most beautiful watches I've ever seen. So I happened to be in London, and I got a little paddle and I stood in the back of the room because the room was so incredibly packed. And they're like, okay, who's up for this lot? And I raised my paddle, and then after about two bids, I was like, "Ooh, I'm way out of my league." And that thing went for like, I think it went for 70 grand or something like that. Um, but it left an indelible impression on me. I was like, okay, I really would like to have one of these in my life. And this was when like chronometric souverains like you could get them secondhand for like 15K US.
Sure.
They really were not that expensive, and they were really a bargain at that price. And eventually I trawled around and I found one. Actually, weirdly, I found one on some message board, and I contacted the guy. I'm like, hey, if you'll sell, I'm interested in buying it. And he's like, oh yeah, of course. And then he's like, are you Mark from the Armoury? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, oh, I'm one of your customers. I'm like, oh, that's great. I can't bargain with you now.
No, you can. Contra deal for suits.
I thought about that, but I was like, oh, is that kind of weird? So I was like, okay, I can just pay cash up front. And I took the piece off. I loved it. It was awesome. And I went on this kind of like FP collecting kick, acquired a couple more pieces, and do you want me to tell that whole resonance story? I'm sorry. I
was working up to it.
Okay.
You can clearly tell. I mean, you can not tell it if you like. They can.
I always wonder,
elsewhere.
Are people really sick of hearing that story? Like, is this like when they trudge out the astronauts to talk about the Speedmaster? Not that I'm an astronaut by any means, but it's just like.
I'm sure there's plenty of people that haven't heard it. I think.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
It's worth
I think it's worth. But my challenge to you is tell it in a slightly different way.
Should I tell in a higher pitched voice? I mean,
yeah.
Should I tell with an Irish accent? I
can't do that.
I'll offend all my Irish customers.
Yeah, exactly.
That's perfect. I'll tell you what, you can just tell the viewers later on how many minutes this was, so they can just skip over this part. They don't want to hear this damn story again. I still enjoy it though. Okay.
Yeah.
So, I, being like this maniac for smaller watches, there was one particular FP Journe piece that I happen to be actually wearing today. That I was looking for a long time. It's called the Octa Divine 36. So it's their Octa automatic movement with various complications. So like moon phase, 120 power reserve, and a date window on there, but in a 36 millimeter case. It was actually a ladies' watch. And, for me, like, it's never bothered me to wear ladies' size watches. Like, oftentimes it's the only thing that'll fit me anyway. So I have no hangups by that whatsoever. So anyway, I bought this piece from a dealer in California. I enjoyed it for a while. And then the date window stopped advancing, so I had to send it in for servicing. So I was in New York, I sent it in for servicing. And then a little while later, I get this letter from FP Journe USA being like, oh, this is a stolen watch, and you have to provide all the paperwork to show that you purchased it in good faith, or we will report you to the authorities. I was like, okay. So luckily I still had like the email trail and all the wire transfer receipts and all that sort of stuff. And I provided to them, and they were like, okay, thank you very much. Like, you are clearly like, a victim of a crime. But unfortunately we do have to confiscate the watch. And I was like, damn, okay. And then I was like, well, how did you know it was stolen in the first place? They're like, oh, well, stolen from our shop in Paris 10 years ago. And they actually sent me the insurance paperwork to like prove that it was a stolen watch, and the insurance paid out for it as well. So them recovering the watch, they are obliged to return that watch to the insurance company, because actually it's the insurance company who rightfully owns it now.
Sure.
I was dealing with Pierre Halimi, who is the CEO of FP Journe, and a really great guy, one of my favorite people in the world. And Pierre was like, you know what? I'm sorry I had to put you through all this. Obviously, I hope you understand. I was like, yeah, of course I understand. And he said, if you have a chance, let's meet up sometime. So I said, yeah, I would love to. So we met up in his New York boutique when I was on a trip later on in the year. And I was hanging out with him, and we were having a good chat. And then two of my really good customers came into the shop back to back. I actually totally forgot that they were pretty big FP Journe collectors as well. I'm like, hey, Pierre, how's it going? Nice to see you. And then I guess Pierre was like, oh, this isn't just some Yahoo who buys stolen watches. This is like someone that might be interested to do other things with. So he came down and saw the Armoury, and he loved it. He bought a bunch of stuff. And he said, let's do some joint events together. I think there's like some synergy between FP Journe and the Armoury. I said, yeah, I would love to. So we did some joint events together. That was great. And then Pierre was like, listen, I'm really sorry that I had to confiscate your watch, but if you want, like, I will make you a one-off. And I was like, oh, wow, that's amazing. I would love a one-off. He's like, I know. It's cool. Like, I have no idea what to ask for. And he was like, I'll tell you what, you can just borrow something from my collection. So Pierre has like the 100th of every FP piece. And he always used to wear a resonance. He had the 100th resonance that was the only resonance I've ever seen that patinaed. So the dial was no longer that like golden yellow. It was like a kind of goldy, browny, bronzy sort of yellow. It was beautiful.
Mm.
And so I was like, okay, if you don't mind. And I borrowed his resonance, and I kept it for like 4 months. I was like, Pierre, do you want this thing back? You're starting to make me nervous. No, it's fine. Just hang on to it. All right. So I hung on to it, and that was when I was like, okay, I think I have to figure out a way to get a resonance in my life. It would have been the most expensive watch I've ever purchased. In fact, it still is the most expensive watch I've ever purchased. But I knew like I needed to have one, especially since like it was going to be just for me. It was pretty special. It was cool. Um, and then I was telling one of my colleagues at the shop about this whole thing, and he's like, I bet our customers would be interested in something like this. I was like, oh, yes, that's a good point. And so I went from like originally wanting a white dial resonance. Like my original idea was just do a white dial resonance, navy lettering on everything, and that would have been it. But like white dials are not to everyone's taste. Like a lot of people find them a little too clean or a little too simple, blah blah. And so I thought, okay, well, if it's going to be for our customers, I think a blue dial would be very appealing to a lot of people. So I set about trying to figure out a blue dial, and like the colors of the thing are very important to me. As you can imagine, as someone who like deals with kind of cloth and clothing all the time.
Sure.
But it was a matter of finding the right combination of colors, and eventually I got my inspiration in London when I was looking at an Andreas Gursky exhibition at the Southwark Museum, and there was this beautiful image of like coastline and sea, and the sea was this perfect kind of slate blue, and there was the cream foam from the waves hitting the shore, and the shore and the beachhead was this lovely kind of taupe-ish color with a little bit of gold to it. And I thought, okay, that's it. And luckily, I had a good camera on me, so I took photos and I sampled off of that photo for the colors that I wanted for the resonance that I was eventually able to produce. So that was, slate blue dial, and then the normal white for the subdials, but then all the lettering was in navy. Sorry, all the time lettering was in navy, but then all the brand lettering, so FP Journe, Inventi FSC, that was all in taupe rather than like optic white. And then
That's
as a
nice.
little nod to the Armoury, Inventi FSC, the A is in gold.
That is cool.
That's amazing.
And then when I submitted the design to FP for approval, Pierre was like, "Listen, we do need to do this like in conjunction with some other collectors, because at the end of the day, like you are kind of, you're not like a regular." And I'm like, "Yeah, of course." And then luckily, one of my really good customers, who was one of their biggest collector, he put his name on the whole request alongside mine, and that kind of got the ball across the line. And they gave me the last 5. They authorized me to make the last 5 38 millimeter platinum cases they had in the factory.
Wow, that's cool.
That is
38
cool.
too.
Yeah, and so I went back to obviously the guy this customer who helped me out with it. Like he bought one, and then 3 of my other just like favorite customers who I always take care of and I always check in with them. They each bought one. Like we had quite a long. Like I told, I think maybe like 10 people, but honestly, I just got to the 5th person. Like one guy passed, and that was it.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
regrets it too.
He definitely regrets it, especially the way the market has gone for FP joints. He definitely
That's
regrets
crazy.
it is nuts.
That's a
But anyway, and
conversation
then
for another day.
the fate of that stolen watch in the end, Pierre got it back for me. So, well, firstly, I went back to the original dealer and I was like, "Hey, you sold me a stolen watch," and we went back and forth for quite a while. And they were just not cooperative. They were like, "Oh, you should talk to the guy who originally sold it to us." And I'm like, "I don't think that's how it works." And so I got a lawyer involved, and then I was bringing them to court. And luckily, they settled, and I got my money back and a little bit of legal damages as well. So I was very satisfied with that. And then Pierre actually was like, if you want that old watch back, you can probably get it back. The insurance company doesn't want that sort of thing anyways. It's like, really? He's like, let me see what I can do. So Pierre actually managed to get that watch back for me for like a ridiculous price. Like probably like kind of junk value, which would have been fair for the insurance company.
Yeah,
and then
right.
they serviced it and put it back right. And it's just so nice. It's so beautiful. And it was, just a great conclusion to that whole saga. Because this whole process like took like
That's
2 years,
amazing.
I guess. Yeah.
Yeah,
It was
That's a
what
happy. That's a happy story.
it was a
What a
happy
story.
story, and I made some good friends out of the whole thing. And actually, weirdly, so we produced this. So when Pierre came to store, we have this jacket called the City Hunter, and Pierre really likes it. And he bought one, and then FP saw it, and he bought one, and now they all really like it. So they have like every single color. And actually, I try to send FP like one for Christmas every year now. And since then, like I've slowly managed to kind of like position this jacket as like the watch guy's jacket. So Philips
Ah.
Perpetual I did a special run for them in a special color and design for them. In fact, like at the Geneva retrospective auction a couple days ago, Oral Box and Alex Goatby were both wearing it. I was on like a
Very
watch.
cool.
Yeah, you know me. I'm always trying to like, have an angle in the background somewhere. But like Tim Mosso on Watchbox, he's wearing one now, which I'm very proud of. Tim is great, by the way. Like that is a great show, and like I had such a good time talking to him. And
Yeah,
who
wow.
else? Wada-san over at Hodinki Japan. He's got one too. So
You ship to
good
Australia,
spreads.
don't you?
Well, I ship to Australia, man. So if you guys
Yeah,
want one,
okay.
just
All
let
right.
me know.
City
Yeah,
Hunter.
Yeah, mates rates,
Well,
mates rates, mates rates.
we want to be
It's coming
we want to be
up.
cool like all the other watch guys and have the cool
Felix, it is
team
my
jackets.
birthday in just a couple of weeks, mate. So we'll just grab the tape measure out and we'll work this out.
Sounds good. I like it.
I love that. Hey, what I want to hear, because obviously, you've got some very, very great customers. Have you seen any kind of interesting watches come through the shop or any trends sort of as you kind of catch the wrists of these people throughout the day?
I mean, I see some great pieces in the shop. Like, just such a pleasure to be able to like, and they always let me have a little play with them. So I'm always
What's been the
grateful
biggest
for that.
one that you're just like, holy fuck, this is wow?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, there've been so many crazy things. We've had Dufours come through the store.
Wow.
I really like that Patek 1526 that I mentioned earlier. That one's a real pleasure to see because that was like the first serially produced perpetual calendar that Patek did. I saw a Haldeman the other day.
Ooh.
If you've never had a chance to check out the Haldemans, they are awesome. I didn't realize how good they were. They're really, really something. I loved that. Um, Someone came in with a Jade Dial FP the other day. That was sweet. Yeah, it was a Jade Dial Optimum. He said he
Okay.
got it from Paris. What else? I mean, see a lot of Daytonas and stuff. Those are cool
Sure.
too.
Yeah.
You're a bit of a Daytona collector, right? You've kind of
Or the
No,
opposite.
not really. No, the only even remotely Daytona-y thing I had was I had a 6238, which I still love,
okay.
and I sold it. I kind of regret it. Partly because I didn't get as much money as I was hoping for it, but partly because like it was a really beautiful watch. The 6238 with just silver dial, it's super simple. It's very, very like low key Rolex. I'm into it.
Yeah,
Like the
sure.
only Rolexes I own now, I have the Explorer, like the
Mm-hmm.
114270, and I have a couple of day dates sitting in the safe, but those are kind of like park it for a rainy day type watches. I haven't really done anything with that. I had an Onyx day date as well. I
Oh,
sold
lovely.
that. Yeah, it was. I don't regret it. It's really nice. It just wasn't quite for me. And then probably my favorite Rolex that I have is I have a 2811. The 2811 is a two reg chronograph that's on. It's on I think like the Valjoux 22 or 23. And weirdly, I have collected because I like two reg chronographs. I have collected a lot of like two reg chronographs based on that movement. So like the what you call it.
Have you got the salmon dial or like the black dial?
I had the salmon. I had the salmon dial with the
Wow.
military hands. Yeah, and they weren't
That's a pretty
expensive back in the
serious
day.
piece.
Well, they weren't
it
that
is.
expensive back in the day. Like they weren't common, but no one knew what the hell they were anyway, so they weren't really that expensive. Like that's what I like to collect, honestly, these days. Is like I like to collect stuff
Cool.
that is not really on people's radar, but I just luckily happen to like it. Like that's how I got into 3800s. At one point, I had a lot of Patek 3800s back when they were like 10K a piece.
Yeah, sure.
Now they're like stupid money. I sold all of them. I just kept one for myself. I kept this weird, like radial sunburst dial with Dauphin hands, which was actually an aftermarket thing. Like back in the day, Patek used to be willing to change the dials. So I even have the service receipt from Patek changing it from the normal blue dial to this like gray gray sunburst dial.
That'll be useful if you ever come to sell it.
I assume so. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
It's interesting actually. Like now, when you get an extract from Patek, they will write on the extract if the dial was not the one that the watch was born with. Like they'll write it in big letters to the point where it's like a little bit scary looking.
I've got one last question about watches before we sort of get into the home stretch and wrap it up.
Oh yeah,
And it's sort of a philosophical question. Are you into the details of watches or the big picture?
You know what? I'm into it on a lot of different levels.
Okay.
I like the bargain hunting aspect of it. Like there's no way I can say I'm not. Like it's just fun to find a good deal, you know, and it's fun to dig like that. Um, but you know, like I do consider my watches as like part of my clothing, and just as my clothing presents me on my behalf, like my watch needs to as well. So there's always like an important kind of aesthetic and personal side to it. Um, I started taking watchmaking classes at Horological Society in New York, uh,
Okay.
and I appreciate movements. Like I like the engineering behind movements, and I like knowing how things are made. Um, so that you know, there are also pieces that I just collect for the sake of the movement. Like a good example is the IWC 5441. That was a reissue of the original Portuguese,
Sure.
down to the movement.
1993.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
You remember.
Sure do.
Man, it is such a beautiful movement, you know, and it's so, and people don't make movements like that anymore. It's really kind of a shame.
Absolutely.
I mean, I bought stuff like the HE1. That was definitely like I bought that for the movement because it was just like so beautifully finished. I sold that in the end, but I replaced that with an SBGZ001 because again, it was just such a, like there's such amazing examples of like fine watchmaking, you know.
Absolutely. So we've taken up enough of your time, and we end on something non-watch related or something non-work related. Ideally,
Okay.
I'm going to ask you in a second about a recommendation that you might have for anyone listening. But first, I want to thank you for a recommendation that you inadvertently gave me.
Oh, okay.
Because
I hope it was a good
Changed his life.
yeah, a couple of years ago, I needed a new phone, and you, I think, had recently picked up a Pixel, and you had written an excellent
He
review.
doesn't shut up about it.
You'd written an excellent review, and you've been quite positive about it on Instagram. And it was one of the things that got me over the line about switching from the iPhone to the Pixel. And I'm very, very
nice.
happy with it. Unfortunately, I
good.
recently dropped it. So now I need to
no.
update. Should I get a 4A or a 5?
The 5's a little smaller, but you
I
say
like
you have big
small.
hands, huh?
I've got
Oh, you
I've
like
got
small?
the I've got the small Pixel 3 at the moment.
I think you'd like the 5.
Okay.
I actually just got my 5. I had to buy it in the US and then have someone ship it over for me. I haven't even opened it yet, but I'll tell you what's also worth having a second look at.
Okay.
The Sony Xperia 5 II. Yeah, that one. You know, I was always interested in it, and then the 5, just like the Pixel 5, just I was like, when the hell is this damn thing coming out? And then I saw the Xperia 1, which was good but massive, and then they announced the 5 II, and I kind of bought it as a like on a punt, but I'm really pleased with it. I actually might stick with it instead of using that Pixel 5. So maybe if you need a Pixel 5, I can just sell you mine.
Yeah,
It's still in
maybe.
the box.
Yeah. We could ship it down with the jacket.
Yeah.
That's
But
great.
check out the 5 II. It's definitely worth a look because it's firstly the sensors are great. If you're used to using Sony DSLRs, it actually brings over the interface from Sony DSLRs as well. It's got a physical shutter button, which I really miss. I really miss having a button specifically designed for just activating a shutter. I guess I'm just like a little old school like that. The lenses are good. There's a 16, a 24, and a 70 millimeter equivalent on there, and the results are good. Like they're a little bit less. They're not very processed. They're very kind of natural out of phone look, but that's kind of what I like personally too.
Very cool. That's a good recommendation. Well, what we do like to ask our guests as we wrap a show out is to ask for recommendations on things they've been listening to, watching, maybe reading, basically just killing the time. Aside from tech, have you got anything that you think everyone should check out?
Oh man, so many things.
Lay them down.
Let's see. I just finished reading The Auctioneer, which is about Simon de Prury, who was like the chairman of Philips when Philips kind of transitioned from being an art gallery into an auction house. It's worth a read. It's pretty good. Like there's a lot of name dropping, but
Sure.
it was interesting hearing about his work and really like it's a pretty cool adventure. So I would recommend that. Um, what else is there? I've been watching more TV recently because I've been like just stuck in Hong Kong.
Uh-huh.
The Good Place.
Yes.
Oh yes.
The Good Place is really good.
It lives up to the name.
It lives up to the name. No, because also it actually ends well. Like everything just wraps up so elegantly. It's like a very well crafted show. I'm really impressed. So I definitely recommend The Good Place. I still play a lot of computer games and video games. Like it's the only thing that gets my mind off of work. And one game I finished recently, like if you remember Fallout 1 and 2, like old isometric style RPG, Wasteland 3 is by a lot of the original team, and it's a great spiritual successor to like those original Fallout 1 and 2 games. So I definitely recommend that. And if you enjoy things like Dark Souls, like just really, really punishingly hard games, Sekiro, also by From Software, who did Dark Souls, Sekiro is amazing. Really,
Cool.
really good. Yeah.
Well, that's some great recommendations. Thank you so much for joining us. It has been a very educational, a very interesting chat. We'll make sure we link up thearmoury.com, which is your shop. We'll have to link up your Instagram, which is markcho.com, spelt how it sounds. And of course, we're going to have to link up all of those great recommendations and all of those really cool things that we've talked about just now. But Mark Cho, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me, and I hope the listeners enjoy this podcast.
They definitely will. Alrighty.
Thanks a lot.
Oh, that was none other than Mark Cho. That was a great chat. I've learnt something about style, I think. I didn't think I could learn anything else about style. I mean, Birkenstocks.
I think you can learn a lot, to be honest.
I think I've learned a lot about watch size. I think I've learned I need to get a new phone. That's again, we'll link up the Armoury, and we'll link up Drake's, we'll link up Mark Joe, we'll link up their sponsors.
The survey.
The survey, yeah, let's link up the survey. You can still do it.
Sponsors this week, Gucci. Check out the grip.
Nice.
Great way to support us by buying everyone in your life grips.
Yep.
Also, Inglewood Coffee Roasters, obviously use our code OT30 for those sweet beans at a sweet discount. Email us if you want to chat. You want to chat watches or do some matchmaking? That's
or
OT.
Anything else? I mean, if you want to talk to me about how my style has changed your life, feel free to do that.
I'm sure we're going to be inundated with emails. And follow us on Insta, ot.podcast.
Nice. Thanks, of course, to Major Tom Media as well for making this happen. He's a
always
top gent. And thank you, Andy Green, for your incessant sass.
All right, you're welcome. We'll see you guys next week.